Hello, Legend of the Samurai here with another high pin count Japanese dimple lock, this time the Agent 15 pin cylinder. It has 3 rows of pins, 5 pins in each row, and all of them use security drivers. However, this is a relatively low-cost replacement cylinder on the Japanese market, and it is manufactured down to a price point. So tolerances are relatively loose, and as such, these are fairly straightforward to pick. So I'll be tensioning with, doesn't even need to be very snug, but bottom of the keyway. And then I figured I would go through and show a couple of sort of strategies for dealing with crowded high pin count locks, because most of the pins are touching each other, and this does have actual zero lifts, so you do actually have to get around those. So I'll start off on the right side using this right flag. I'm actually using the flat back of it because it gets me close up to that right side and gives me clearance from the left side. So I'll go through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is set. Make sure all of those set. 2, 3, 4, 5. And another thing to note, I'm tensioning clockwise here. In specifically high pin count locks, working on the right side, if I'm picking clockwise, that actually makes it considerably more difficult because the torque from picking will increase the binding force, and with security pins you can get these things to lock up entirely, so much that you have to counter-rotate off manually. One thing you can do is, instead of rotating the pick, you can lever it sideways a little and just push on those pins. So that's what I've done on that side. Moving up to the top, I'm going to switch to a little tiny flag. This is a bit of bent music wire, and I use this because it is less than the width of the keyway, and it is narrow enough to get above the left row of pins, so I can go in from the front, dip it down below the top pins, and then lift them back up. So 1 seems good. There's 2. 3 seems good. There's 4, and 5 seems good. And now I'll switch over to the opposite side. That's a left flag for the remaining side. And this one, because I'm picking counterclockwise, I get very nice counter rotation just from rotating. So here's 1, 2 is set, 3, 4, if I don't slip off the pin, 5. There we go. So we are open. And lock that back up. I will not spin this one full circle because the drivers are narrower than the keyway and they're all staggered, so it does not relock, but all of the drivers and springs will fly out into the keyway if you do spin these full circle without something blocking that open keyway. Alright, and I have made this one a little easier to gut. These covers to slide. There's one of our springs. And then we've got one really big spring back here, because in that chamber there's actually a ball bearing, and that is a detent to center the plug. All right, second row. Driver from the second chamber as well. All of the drivers are in fact identical. They use the same length for all of the key pin heights in all 3 rows. Third row out. Getting the last key pin out is always a trick, because the core wants to rotate. Oh well, drop the core out and get it that way. Go. There's our last key pin. So here we have our plug. Nothing too special going on. There's that little dimple there, which the ball bearing detent presses into to center the plug. Sort of single step constriction to keep the T-pin key pins from falling in, but then there's this bevel up at the top of the chamber, and that is not a good thing for security. That gives you a little bit of extra wiggle room for things to tilt and get themselves set up over that shear line. Keyway is got a tiny bit of warting in the middle, but otherwise not an issue. 3 staggered rows. The housing is about as simple as it can be. Nothing special going on there. And then the pins themselves. So they do actually use all security drivers. They are all mushroom pins. Show a couple of them closer. And they are reasonably well made. There's just one problem, which is that the bottom is domed. And the key pins, similarly, are not entirely flat on top. They have a pretty significant bevel there. And with those butted up against each other, the shear line is quite wide. And that's why it's fairly simple to get all of these pins to set to shear, and then they stay set as you keep going, so long as you're not trying to set things way, way out of the binding order. Alright, so there is an Agent 15-pin dimple lock, picked and gutted. It's a fun cylinder. It's got pretty good feedback. You can definitely tell when something is set versus when it isn't. You get nice counter rotation out of the mushrooms, and you actually do have to counter rotate all of them. The zero lifts are true zero lifts, and if you got two of those opposite each other, that could make it quite difficult to reach things. And the zero lifts do actually make it somewhat difficult to get to that top row, which is what one of these very thin picks is good at dealing with, so it gets above those and you can still reach those high lifts there. But these are relatively widely available in the Japanese market, whether new or used, and they're not too expensive, so if you're looking for a high pin count but more accessible dimple lock to play with, I would recommend picking one of these up, because they are fun to pick. Alright, thank you for watching, and have a nice day.